Hi there, and thank you for joining us on the Overcomers Overcoming podcast. We feature those who are in the process of overcoming or have overcome any type of life encounter, life obstacle that at the time seemed to be almost insurmountable. With this podcast, we have three objectives in mind. Our first objective is we want you to know with a confident resolve you are not alone. We want to work with you. We want you to know there are others who are working with you, who want to help you through whatever you are encountering, and together we will get through whatever you're experiencing.
Our second objective is there are multiple options for any life encounter you are facing. We want to help you develop a resolve that there are various options and solutions to any life dilemma.
Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you're encountering something that was possibly a decision you made sometime in the past, and if you had the opportunity for a life redo, you would make a different decision. We want to help you with those critical thinking skills that can help you make an informed decision and not encounter what you're going through at the moment. We are the Cooper Culture, a veteran-owned business. We work with business personnel and families to develop and sustain connected relationship cultures within their families and organizations. That type organization is one where people feel wanted, appreciated, and genuinely a part of that organization. I'm with my wife and business partner, Marty, who has helped me facilitate this podcast. Today we feature Dr. Matt Zakreski for a fourth episode. Our purpose today is to discuss raising neurodivergent people in the context of marriages or those who are married, parents, grandparents, caregivers, whatever the situation is. There is a startling increase in divorce rates amongst those who are raising divergent children. And the reason for that is because it seems we don't know exactly how to adapt to, we don't understand how the neural functions of the neurodivergent people work. Marty, what are some takeaways we can gain from Dr. Matt in this episode?
It's always good to hear from Dr. Matt. And when you talk to him, you can hear in his voice, see in his eyes and his face the joy he has of working with these children. He talks about the grief that goes along with having a child like this, the acceptance of this is who the child is. I know he works with parents, grandparents to help us all know how to work with them, how to speak to them, because they are smart and they have a purpose in life.
Very important, Marty. Every person has a purpose in life. Dr. Matt does a great job of helping us learn and adapt to neurodivergent people. Let's listen and learn together. Dr. Matt, great to have you back with us again. For our listeners who may be listening to you for the first time, I want to encourage our listeners to go back 3 episodes to listen to each one and to listen to Dr. Matt. We are addressing neurodivergent people. And from our perspective, Dr. Matt, we are caregivers for grandparents of. We are not clinically certified in, if that's an appropriate term. So I want our listeners to know that we are learning with every conversation we have. We learn from people such as you, Dr. Matt, and from others who are, but it's just great to have you with us. And Dr. Matt, I thought for this episode, you can talk to us, we can talk together about, let's say the husband, wife, not exclusively to the husband and wife, but there's some married people who do not know how to adapt to and learn from neurodivergent people. And we have heard of marriages that have dissolved because of that. And Marty and I believe you as well, Dr. Matt, are very concerned about that. And maybe through this podcast, through partnering with people, we can help others learn how to adapt to neurodivergent people. Dr. Matt, that's somewhat of a long introduction, but it's great to have you back with us.
And it's great to be back. And I think this is a topic that a lot of people become aware of in the work that I do, but it's important to name it and say it out loud. So the divorce rate in families with neurodivergent kids is significantly higher than families with neurotypical kids. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Um, the first is that, there are infinite number of parenting books out there, but one of the things that there's not enough of is parenting books for how to raise neurodivergent kids. And so, if you're having a kiddo and you get all these like parenting books and you realize when your kid is 6, 8, 10, 13, whatever, your kid is wired differently, you've got to unlearn all the stuff and relearn new stuff. And if you have other kids in your house who are neurotypical, you have to really have two separate menus in your home for every meal you do. And that's a major shift for a lot of people. It takes up a lot of mental and emotional energy. And the what I see in a lot of households is the neurodivergent kid sort of becomes the fulcrum. It's like the gravity center in the home because every decision we're making, whether we're going out to dinner or going on vacation or buying pants or where we're going for the holidays, is sent through the lens of what can our neurodivergent kiddo handle. And from a very practical perspective, those are conversations we have to have, but they're also exhausting from a parenting perspective. And sooner or later, that friction tends to manifest itself between the parents themselves.
And what I'm sensing from what you're saying is the neurodivergent person might get a larger percentage of time, attention, and so forth to the exclusion of the neurotypical. And I'm going to try to phrase what I'm observing as a question. Um, what I had planned to do 30 minutes ago won't necessarily come to fruition because my neurodivergent person dictated something different. And the neurotypical person might say, well, you're not staying with your rules, mom and dad, grandma, grandpa. You're always catering to. Is that some of the environment that are in the various families?
Oh yeah. I mean, I get a lot of like, you're treating our kiddo like little Lord Fauntleroy, right? Gets everything he wants all the time. And and in some ways that's a very honest and accurate portrayal because we're all overworked and exhausted, and if you can give your kiddo the kind of chicken nuggets that they like to eat rather than the kind of chicken nuggets they won't eat, then it's just, I mean, like, sometimes it's worth not having the fight, right? But parents tend to view what amount of fights are acceptable through very different lenses. Oftentimes that comes down to who spends more time with the kid, right? So if we'll use some sort of traditional gender norms here, but like, let's say the dad is the one who's at the office all day and mom is home with the kids, right? And we know that there are homes where they do different setups. I'm just going to use this one as a case example. So dad's away all day. Mom is in the mess. Mom is getting the phone calls from the school, like Johnny's getting sent home today. So because mom is in it so much more, she sees a lot more of the nuance. She gets sort of, it almost becomes paralysis by analysis because there's so much you see. Whereas the other parent who comes home at 6 o'clock is like, listen, it just needs some discipline. You just need to be different. And the answer is almost always between those two approaches, right? Every piece of work we do in this space is love and boundaries, right? You gotta love on the kid. You also gotta have firm boundaries, right? The challenge becomes, when do you hold firm on those boundaries and when do you say this is a fight not worth having?
I I'm gonna tell you, academically, I understand exactly what you're saying, And in this scenario, where dad is away at work, and we're not trying to stereotype any families, but just in this one example where dad is away at work doing what he does at work, and mom is at home contending all day long with maybe calls from school, or if they're homeschooled, whatever's happening in the house, she is very aware minute by minute what the temperament is. And dad may be frustrated from work, and he comes home too, and dad may be thinking, well, gosh, all the rules I had set up for this family have just vaporized, kind of thing. And so I can clearly understand. And what you're saying is maybe a middle of the road approach, not the hard line, may be the approach that mom and dad need to come together on.
I want
Yeah.
to say, but the mom knows the trigger points.
Yeah.
Mom knows how to calm the child down and or do whatever it takes to get through the situation.
Yeah.
And so I feel like communication between mom and dad should be this is how I do it.
Yeah.
I
And
think I don't know.
well, and let's take that idea, Marty, and let's tweak it just a little bit, right? Both parents should play to their strengths, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if dad is the organized one and dad puts the shoes in the shoe cubby and the coats on the coat rack and the frying pans go where the frying pans go, then I want to put dad in the position to lead with organization skills. And if mom is the fun one, it's arts and crafts, let's go to the park, then I want to push mom towards those strengths, right? What we see, and when we communicate that to from a family therapy perspective, like what I do, but also internally, it's I handle things differently than you. My approach is helpful in these ways for these reasons. I'm not going to take away your strengths for the way you approach things, just like I hope you don't take my strengths away. You
Yep.
know, and like I'm the sort of I think a really great analogy here, right? Is I'm a really good cook, right? I'm good on the grill. I'll make you a really nice dinner. I'm not a good baker. Baking requires way too much executive functioning. It's very exact in its measurements, right? And that's not how my brain works, right? And our kids love to help us in the kitchen. So if I'm throwing a bunch of steaks on the grill in the summer, I'll help my kids make a chimichurri. I'll help them with the salsa, with the fruit salad. They love that. But yesterday my daughter's like, let's make a cake. And I'm like, honey, right? Because my wife is good at baking. Now, it doesn't mean I can't bake. It just means like that's a better fit for that skill set, right? So I think a lot of times having that sort of very open and honest meta communication of which skill set does this problem require, and aligning the parent with that skill set with the problem, I think, lowers the burden on everybody in the household, including the kid.
Right. I want to ask with that, to me, that just shows the child, hey, there's organization, there's peace here, mom and dad get along. I mean, do they think that way? I know they think different.
Now,
Um,
I cannot tell you how many times I have heard from kids that it's like mom and dad got divorced because of me.
Mm-hmm.
mhm.
And it's because one of the things our brains do is in the absence of information, our brains create their own narratives. Those narratives tend to be catastrophic in nature, and they tend to be focused on us because our brain is going to default to a story that it understands rather than trying to like cast about for information it needs. So, mom and dad got divorced because dad cheated on somebody on a work trip. This is my fault somehow because I did or didn't do, right? And what I tell my clients when they say things to me like this, I was like, listen, unless you know, got on your dad's phone, signed him up for Tinder, set up the date, and then like convinced him to, have an affair with this person, it's not your fault. Does Do you contribute a little bit to the stress in that house? Sure, like everybody else in the family unit does, from grandma and grandpa all the way down to your baby cousin, right? We all hold some piece of this here, but I think that they're, when it's a step too far to use the word fault.
Right. I also want to talk about the grandparents' role too, and how we can not interfere or go by the rules, uh, because the grandparents' home is the relaxing home to me, I
Yeah.
think.
In our case, that is, I think, what it is. Our granddaughter, neurodivergent, high spectrum autistic, I think views our home as a place to relax, a little bit lesser rules and so forth, but it's just a place where I just not do anything, but let's just say I can do things that I want to do. She is a creative person and she spends more time on the device creating than what mom and dad will allow. So we're a place of freedom, so to speak.
Yeah. And that is a great and healthy boundary to have. One of the cool things about being neurodivergent is that you can name a lot of those things overtly with neurodivergent people because their brains do really well with concrete things. The rules at mom and dad's house are ABC. The rules at grandma and grandpa's house are XYZ. The rules at school are DCE, right? Like you can absolutely name that, make it overt, right? Not just sort of hope they imply it, but like, no, let's actually say like the rules here are different for these reasons. The best thing you can do as grandparents, and this is for all the grandparents out there, is is make sure you're communicating about those rules in a way that isn't a value judgment. It isn't like my rules are better than mom and
Mm-hmm.
dad's rules, because then you're setting the parents up to fail. And also, you want to help the kids transition from the environment which has, let's call it, less rules to the environment at home which has more rules. Because what we see a lot is kids are never happy to leave grandma and grandpa's. They get in the car, they come home, they're okay until the iPad has to go off or it's dinner time and grandma's not going to order pizza. So, like, we want to facilitate a smooth transition, not just go from boiling hot water to ice cubes, right? You want to lower the temperature of the water, get it more like room temperature, and I'm going to bring up the ice cube temperature a little bit just so we can meet in the middle, because otherwise, you know, if we're going to be very broad in our language here, neurodivergent people tend to do poorly with transitions. They tend not to be very good at that. So we want to really support them in how we're approaching these conversations. And and when we set kids up to be successful with transitions by naming the parts of that process, you are giving them and their parents, whom they will ultimately be returning to, a fighting chance to be successful in that process.
I don't know that what I'm going to ask you is typical, but our granddaughter can be, let's say, well, parents tell us frequently, make sure you return her in a detoxed mode, meaning she leaves here excited, and when she goes back home, she is at the level, say, man, just take it down 13 notches type thing. And so I think for us, and gosh, I'm that maybe very multifaceted, Dr. Matt, but can our place of enjoyment, place of freedom, uh, result in too great a high type thing? It's not literally sugar high, but hey, I'm enjoying myself so much that what's funny to me is not necessarily funny to others, and
Right.
so forth. I guess what I'm asking is really multifaceted, and it may be more personal to one than it would be applicable to many others, but I know in our case, sometimes our granddaughter, we return her in a somewhat of a high state of anxiety. I guess maybe there
I,
are, it's a
I'm
high
gonna
state of emotions.
I'm gonna say this. She's 18, and the controls they have at home, she does not like. She
Yeah.
feels like she's not trusted.
Yeah.
Well, let me add that just a little bit to add some definition. She just, within the last few months, got a cell phone. I mean, all kids nowadays, 2, 3, 4 years old, get a cell phone. She was 18 years old before she got her cell phone, and she thinks mom and dad try to control her with monitoring the internet usage, text usage, and so forth. So she feels, mom and dad, you don't trust me. And so that's just a part of the freedom, so to speak, that she has here. And we've told her, we do want to try. You tell us you're going to do something, we trust you. And at home, well, I think it's in the context of trust but verify.
Yeah. I love that. Yep. Um, and this is where it's important to listen to kids without offering a solution, right? You know, like listening is an intervention. We don't doing nothing is doing something,
Yep.
right? You know, and you can absolutely say like, yeah, I hear you, kiddo, and I understand all the reasons you have for wishing things were different. I can certainly understand where you're coming from. I'm validating your perspective. I can't change your parents' rules, right? For good or for ill, but I'm absolutely listening to you. And it's helpful in a couple ways because A, it doesn't put us at odds with the family at home. And also it it's helpful because it doesn't make you have to do anything, right? Like a lot of times we listen, we're like, what do I have to do with this information? We don't actually have to do anything, which means like we just get to listen. And if there's important feedbacks we can give the parents, great. You know, like, when my kids stay with my parents, it's like, well, we want to watch more TV. We want to eat more chocolate. My mom's like, I'm not going to pass that information on to you because that's not helpful information to you. Right. But if my kids are like, we want a jungle gym because when we're at grandma and grandpa's, we go play with the neighbors and they have a jungle gym. Well, that's a good piece of information for me to have. So, it's really about just a clearly defining your values and knowing what works best for us.
Let me unpack a little bit more the word listening, which to me connotes let's unpack this conversation a little bit further. Let's go more in depth and so forth. For the neurodivergent person who says something to the effect, hey, they don't use the expression, at least in our situation. I know you want to know more, but she will say, well, I'm just not, everything's fine. No more, nothing more in depth than that. But we would like to learn what her inner feelings are, but she is not that expressive to where she'll even go there. An in-depth conversation might last, what, Marty, 3 or 4 minutes, maybe?
Well, she's been kind of open with the rules at home with me. And I have said, those are rules at home. I understand your frustration, just like you said. I understand that, but they are rules that I don't, mom and dad have. So, and then that kind of calms her down. But she wants to be independent. She's a very smart
She
child,
wants
and
very much to be independent.
Yeah.
And not to cut you off, Marty, but it's some people may spend 15, 20 minutes just divulging things. Our granddaughter does not, and I don't know if that is somewhat typical of neurodivergent people or not.
Yeah. It's unfortunately very common,
Okay.
and there's and when kids get stuck on something, it's like a rock in their shoe, right? It's like, well, like I can't do anything until this thing is resolved.
Yep.
And it's like, well, I can't resolve that thing, then I guess we're at an impasse. But that's where I like to have conversations with. I know it feels like we can't move forward till this is resolved. However, we don't have a solution for it right now. So let's table it. Let's have that computer program run in the background while we're doing something else. So if we were going to work on something else while we're waiting for that to resolve, what could we work on? it's acknowledging the restrictions around that idea and then pivoting into a space of what other things, what other low-hanging fruit is on the tree, right?
Hmm.
I know you want to eat the apple that's way up there, and we're trying to find you a ladder. Can we eat these other apples while we're waiting, right? And because I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people make when it comes to parenting neurodivergent kids is that we tend to blow their concerns out of the water. It's like, well, it's like I can't deal with that, so I'm going to act like it's not a problem. I mean, just because it's not a problem doesn't mean we have to drop everything and deal with it, but we also can't pretend that it doesn't exist, right? So I think a lot of parents need the language, need help in developing the language between those spaces. That's like, I hear you, I validate your concerns, I'm doing my best to solve this problem. However, while I'm working to, like, my skin in the game is I'm working to solve the problem, your skin in the game is that you've got to trust me and help me find a way to move forward however we can in between those two things.
Is it fair to say that every day is a learning experience, and that when you're working with parents and grandparents, just let's say when they first learn at a somewhat early age, the child may be two, three, maybe even earlier. But is it fair to say, Dr. Matt, this is a long term? This could be 2 decades of learning type thing. That every day could be a little bit different, so it's going to require a lot of patience to adapt almost daily, maybe even almost hourly to various situations?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think that it's a, I think it's a good thing to, you have to consider it a lifelong learning process, right? Like
Yep.
we're always going to be working on these intersections of different needs and how we communicate about that and how we perceive those different needs. Also, it's a thing that we get better at a little bit and a little bit and a little bit as we go. Like, so don't think of it as like I couldn't do a push-up and now I can do a push-up. It's I'm getting better at doing push-ups the more push-ups I do.
Hmm.
And because I think a lot of parents want to see skill sets communicated as some sort of like my kid couldn't do this and now they can, versus a lot of the skills we're talking about here are a lot more nuanced. They're a lot more subjective. So you might just see glimmers of your kid's a little bit more willing to listen to you. Your kid is a little bit more tolerant of a different perspective. Your kid is a little bit more emotionally resilient. And when you see those moments, you really want to praise the behavior you want to see. So if your kiddo used to flip out after 3 minutes of conversation and now it takes 10 minutes, be like, hey, I appreciate how long you were able to keep it together. These are not easy conversations, and I know this is hard for you. Those things go a long way because when we praise the behavior we want to see, we show our kids not only that we see the role that they play in this process, but also we see how hard they work, they're hard they're working to be a part of the solution.
I think one of the, well, two very important things you said from my perspective is know our individual strengths,
Yeah.
husband, wife, grandfather, grandmother, whatever the role of the caretaker is, know and act on those individual strengths, and then use that strength to work with. But then the other thing you said that could be a lifetime, let's say, deterrent negative, if your child, the grandchild, were ever to say, I am the reason for whatever negative, that to me can stay with a child for a long time. And if we are patient enough, and I'm discerning, this is how I'm discerning what you're saying. If we're patient enough to know our strengths, be able to work together, and if we purpose to stay with our neurodivergent child through the end, that may take several years. But if we develop that as a purpose, you'll learn daily how to do that. And I don't want to suppose that what I said is entirely accurate, but that's what I'm discerning from what you're saying.
Yeah, and you're really close to it. You know, I mean, the and it's when you were talking, the thing that flashed into my brain was all of those wonderful things you were just saying come from a place of accepting that your kid is different.
Hmm.
You know, I have a family friend who had a really tough time understanding that his son, well, they're Italian American, right? So pasta is a big part of their culture, a big part of their life. And their son he has gluten intolerance, right? He has celiac. He can't eat gluten, which means he can't eat a lot of pasta, right? And his dad was like, well, but like he can. I'm like, no, this is a medical thing. Like his body cannot process gluten. And every time he tries to eat gluten, like he has all sorts of like downstream physical effects, right? And it wasn't until dad was able to accept that his kid had a gluten intolerance that really they were able to unlock the next tier of their parent-child relationship. So it
Hmm.
starts with you got to accept the kid you have, not the kid you thought you were going to have.
Right. And I want to say, I had a mother say to me, there's the grieving process.
Uh-huh.
And I think, uh, I don't know how long that takes, for them to grieve that this child is not what I thought I was going to have.
And that's, I mean, and you named it, and like it's sort of a lot of parents feel like it's a dirty word,
Hmm.
right? And but you're allowed to grieve because we all have an idea in our heads about what parenting is going to be and the kids we're going to have. And the fact of the matter is, like, so I spend a lot of time consulting with schools and writing IEPs, right? Individualized
Yep.
education
Yeah.
plans and 504 plans, right? And fighting for accommodations and acceleration and enrichment and all these things. And every so often I talk to a parent and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was just at this IEP meeting. And they're like, a what? I'm like, right, because there are parents out there who never need to know what an IEP is. There are parents out there whose kids can just do baseball and Boy Scouts and sleepovers and go to college and get a part-time job and do all the things that most of society, around 80% of people are neurotypical, can just do or do with minimal supports. But the 20% of people in this world who are neurodivergent, it just takes more energy and effort and legwork to make those systems work for them, which means you're going to have to probably go to a lot of IEP meetings and you're going to have to fight for your kid to get their accommodations met. And you're going to have to think about summer camps that work for your kid, not just the local summer camp, right? You're, thinking about, you know, everything from the kind of food you eat to the kind of clothes you buy your children, right? And if you look at it broadly, it can feel like death by a thousand paper cuts because you just have every single decision you make is a little bit harder, it's a little bit more nuanced. But the flip side of that is that once you find a thing that works for you, you're like, oh man, I've got a thing that works for me. I'm going to buy a million of these. I've got a kid who's a pretty high level dancer and she's got some pretty significant sensory needs. We found a company that sells sensory friendly dance uniforms. And so she's like, I buy all my stuff from them. So it's like the joy you get out of solving a neurodivergent problem feels categorically higher than the joy you'd get for solving a typical problem because it took more sweat equity to solve that problem. So like there is a higher level of joy for this. And Marty, this sort of goes back to the idea of mourning. You know, a lot of dads I talk to are like, I just wanted to throw a ball around with my boy. I wanted to throw the pigskin or the baseball or the basketball, and that's not my kid. I'm like, you're right, it's not your kid. You know, I worked with a family many years ago. Dad was a pretty high level athlete, and he was a track and cross country coach at a pretty elite university and his kid had several neurodivergences, primarily though dyspraxia, sort of a developmental coordination disorder. And dad was like, I just never thought I wouldn't be able to kick a soccer ball with my son. And I'm like, yeah, that's hard. I can't sit here and tell you that's something you can just brush off, but there are things you can find that lay the intersection between those things that it just requires thinking a little bit outside the box. Like for instance, like his kid loved nothing more than being around track and field events, so they made him a junior what's a manager, right? So he would run the bottles of water places and he would enter all the times into his laptop because he was very tech savvy, right? So it was the thing like he got to share in the broader construct of sport without doing the sport itself, right? And that helped them enrich and deepen their relationship. So it's not just because it's not what you thought it was going to be doesn't mean it can't happen.
No, and I appreciate what you just said. Go ahead, Marty.
I wanted to say, ask you, as grandparents, we want to find the sweet spot in this child. We want to find what really works for them, and they are happy in that. They are where they're meant to be.
Mhm.
So I guess some advice on how you do that and help the parents, not interfere, but help the parents. I mean, like we've said, uh, our granddaughter is very she loves creating characters, and
Yeah.
she has a good color sense to all of this, and she loves decorating, taking things in the house and moving around, and she decorated the tree all by herself. uh, so that's her focus. So I guess I'm kind of rambling here, going, how do we help find this child's sweet spot?
Yeah.
All grandparents.
Right. And that's the $1,000 question, right? It's really tricky to do. But one thing to consider is different roles elicit different things, right? A lot of times parents will say, like, well, my kid won't tell me anything. How come they tell you a bunch of stuff? I was like, well, that's my job. Like, my job is to get kids to talk to me, right? I'm very good at that. But I'm sure that, that Ron, you've got friends that you share certain things with and that you wouldn't tell your other friends in a million years, right?
Yes,
You served in the armed forces. I'm sure there are some people you can talk about military life with and some people you can't.
right.
So it's just thinking about the power of those relationships. So as the grandparents, you have a sort of more fun, more love role. So leverage that. Like, you know, how, like, you could ask your granddaughter, what are things that we do here that you would benefit from at your parents' house?
Mm-hmm.
What are things that your parents do at their house that we should bring in here?
Yep.
And just naming the differences in those relationships. I think that really drives us forward in a way where we're asking the right questions, not just having the same conversations over and over and over.
Yep, and I appreciate that. And let me ask you, for the neurodivergent person who may say, "I'm different," and they may go further to say, "I'm not only different, but I'm a disappointment." And I'm acknowledging some of the things you've said earlier in this podcast. But if you sense if the person does have these feelings to where they feel free to make those kind of statements, is there a recommended way to approach that? No, you're not a disappointment, and yes, you're different but unique. I mean, you're trying to make that statement into a positive.
Right. And so much of the messaging neurodivergent kids get is how they fall short, how they are different, how they're not living up to everybody's expectations. Like, how come you can't make things easier on us? So, anytime we can find a way to authentically connect to something that feels more strengths based, is
Mhm.
it's going to have an outsized impact because our kids expect to get the doom and gloom. And you know, I have a I have a sort of a philosophy that I always tell teachers when I do teacher trainings. It's like the kids you get not only have heard far more negative comments than their neurotypical peers, they expect the negative comments because once again, they don't know enough about how education works to understand that their challenges in education or the workplace, if we're thinking about the workplace, are anybody's fault other than them. So without that other information, they're just going to keep defaulting to it's my fault. I'm broken. I'm flawed in some way. Everybody else can do this thing but me. So every time you start a relationship with a kid, hell, every time you start a conversation with a kid, you have the opportunity to flip that conversational expectation on its head and be like, listen, I don't care about all the bad stuff that's happened before. I want to know what you want to do today. You've had a lot of problems with screen time in the past. Well, who hasn't? What do you want to make on the iPad today? And naming that process, it helps them get out from in front of their own expectations of things. And it might make them a more willing participant in those conversations.
Sure, I appreciate that. Dr. Matt, on behalf of our listeners, I want to thank you for everything that we can learn from you, through you, as we work with the neurodivergent people. And I think for our listeners, just from our perspective, as a grandparent, we want our listeners to know that neurodivergent people are very valued. They have strengths. It may just take a little more patience, time to determine and develop those strengths. But once we learn that and work with those strengths, where we can do very well in bringing that about, but it seems it may take patience, and we just have to have the longer term patience.
I
Yeah.
also want to say thank you that the grandparents' home can be a little bit different than the parents' home. I mean, I think if the child comes into a little bit of a calmer area and a little more freedom, I feel like that just helps them. I don't know. Maybe I'm wishful thinking. I don't know, but that's how I think. I don't.
Yeah. I mean yes. And like I just love talking to you guys because you approach this with some from such a place of humility. You're like, just help us learn, help us know more. And that's that kind of fundamental curiosity that really is foundational to improving the lives of all people, but especially neurodivergent people, right? Like we always say, it's be curious, not furious, right?
Mm.
Instead of wondering, like, why is my granddaughter always on that damn iPad? It's like, well, let's get curious about that. What is she creating? Why does this scratch an itch for her? Why is that helpful? And then the next curiosity question becomes, how can I be helpful in in supporting that in the healthiest possible way?
Mhm.
Right. And curiosity and communication is going to save the world, right? And it starts from open and honest conversations like this.
And I think
Great.
that is very, very important. I do know that some people think that, well, we've got to limit the amount of time on the device and just put a time limit on it and just say, hey, you got 1 minute remaining. And now the rule is, but yet if they're developing their creativity, I'm just giving you my reasons for it. Maybe the X time limit is maybe we can helpfully relax that a little bit. That's just some of our perspective.
Yeah. I mean, respite care is absolutely a thing, right? And, I think if all you can offer is someone to have an hour off of their lives where they're just like feeling the weight of the world's on their shoulders, then that's a damn good thing.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Dr. Matt, again, thank you so much for your time, your expertise. Thank you for helping us to learn. It's a learning journey, and we will be with this for as long as we need to learn. Acceptance is a huge term from both Marty and me.
Well, and that's, and acceptance can drive us towards plans that are appropriate and adaptable and give us a far better chance of success. So that's exactly where we want to start. And we're going to see really great outcomes that come from that.
I totally believe it. Thank you so
Right.
much for your expertise.
Yes,
And
thank you. And I do hope that a lot of parents, grandparents listen to this podcast that are searching for what do we do.
I mean, there's a lot of great resources out there, and you don't have to solve this problem yourself. It's not a problem that can be solved on its own. So, get that new playbook, build the new systems and structures that are going to support your kid, because your kid is not like every other kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, your life would be easier if they were, but that wasn't the hand we were dealt. All we can do is love the kids we have. And you're approaching that from a position of gathering knowledge and being humble and being able to learn with and from your kid. I mean, that you're going to find your lives get a lot better, a lot faster.
thank you for bringing to mind your playbook. Tell our audience what your playbook is, what it's about, and how they can get it.
So, my first book just came out in November. It's called The Neurodiversity Playbook, and it's a lot about what we were talking about today. It's, helping neurodivergent people and their families develop the tools and strategies they need to navigate a world that was not built for them. Like, the world is built for and by neurotypical people. So we need different sets of skills to be able to navigate those spaces. So it's available on Amazon and on giftedunlimited.com. You also can buy it through my website. If you go to drmattzakreski.com, we try to make it easy to get as many copies of it out to people as we can. But yeah, I mean, it's, we've gotten amazing feedback so far. It seems to really be helping people. It's sort of distilling all the best parts of what I do from therapy and speaking and being on podcasts into a book. So, I mean, if you feel like that would enhance your parenting journey, well, then please go ahead and grab one, because I think it would really help you out.
We certainly encourage our listeners to get that playbook to have right there at our fingertips. Again, Dr. Matt, thank you so much for your expertise and the opportunity to learn with and through you.
Always a pleasure, you guys. Take care.
You too.
Thank you. We appreciate having the opportunity to share our and our guests' life experiences with you.
The Cooper culture advances organizations to achieve and sustain high retention rates, connected communication, and trust through personality insights and principled leadership. You can contact us at our website, thecooperculture.com, and you can contact us directly at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at thecooperculture.com. We work with you to help assess aspects of your culture to advance the environment and people to their best performance. We do that through our staff of certified personal performance coaches, leadership trainers, keynote speakers, and DISC personality behavior experts. You can book a speaking engagement directly through our website by contacting us at ron@thecooperculture.com. We look forward to sharing our life experiences with you, some of which are profound, some of which are pretty funny. Some of those life experiences are ones we'll never do that again because we've been through stuff. We truly look forward to working with you, speaking with you, helping advance you in any way that we can.